Hi folks, this is all the fruit, and today I'm waking up at Playa de los Genoveses in the desert of Cabo de Gata, the only desert in Europe, or you might say the only desert in Western Europe, because there are more deserts like on the Russian-Kazakh border in the east of the continent. You could also say it's just part of the only desert in Western Europe, because basically the whole southeast of Spain, the whole province of Almeria is one big desert. You could also say it's not a real desert, it's considered a semi-desert slash arid steppe slash so on. But for the purpose of this video, it's the only desert in Europe, period. It's a day in late April, and I must say, at least the morning is really cold. It's a real contrast to the Costa Tropical, the tropical coast that lies west of here. The Costa Tropical is protected from the northerly winds by mountains. That's what makes it so tropical. Well, this area, well, the mountains orientated north to south, so no protection from the northerly winds. And so I got battered by them all night here on the beach. A pretty cold night for April, I must say. Oops, okay, let's not get wet after the cold night. I've been camping in this area a lot, mostly in December and January, and well, it's not as cold as the winter. I'm a little bit surprised about the cold. Also, since we are in a desert and since it is incredibly windy, my sleeping bag and everything are completely dry. Well, on the Costa Tropical they were completely soaked in the morning. So here in this part of Spain you can experience incredible climatic differences, like the most tropical area in Europe right next to the most desert-like area in Europe. Also, this area of Cabo de Gata is of incredible beauty, and that's why for decades it was very popular as a background for a lot of fancy movies. You might notice I'm talking about desert, but doesn't it look more like a forest? Well, around here, around the Playa de los Genoveses, yes, they have planted a couple eucalyptus decades ago, and to be honest, I'm wondering how those things even have survived here, because they should have died. They should have died a long time ago. My guess is that here we have underground reservoirs of fresh groundwater, and those trees, which are very well adapted to dry Australian conditions, are surviving here. Behind the beach is a double row of pines. Same thing for them, they shouldn't have survived, but not a single one of them died during the droughts of the last 20 years. So I think, yeah, they are really tapping some groundwater reservoir here, where a small dry riverbed is basically meeting the beach. I've been coming to this area since almost 25 years, and okay, I'm showing you more trees here. Believe me, this is one of the very few places in the whole region where you will see trees. Later, we will climb those hills and visit the old silver mines of San Jose, where, as far as I remember, there is one tree. Well, here you can, by the way, see some remnants of some old agriculture. See those agaves? They're concentrated in very specific places, and sometimes you can still see that the older ones were planted in neat and tidy rows. Those were planted here for fibers and also probably to extract sugar and alcohol from them. A very strange type of agave. It's not really Americana, it's not really Cisalana. If it's not a third species, then it could be some sort of hybrid between those. I've seen populations, for example, in Malta, of plants like this, but some of them look like Americana, some look like Cisalana, most look like those. They have smaller spines here on the side of the leaves than Americana, but Cisalana does not have any. That's why it's easier to use it to extract the fibers. No idea. Tell me what species this is. Yeah, when I started coming here in the early 2000s, already those agave plantations were abandoned. And yeah, while a lot of the agaves on the higher slopes have died, especially Agave Americana, a lot of those old plantations, kind of survive in remnants. I mentioned the droughts of the last 20 years. And yeah, last year when I was in eastern Spain, in Valencia, it was again in April, but everything looked basically parched like it's August. And 3 years ago, I was on the Costa Tropical, and it also looked more or less like a desert. Also, yesterday I talked to a farmer who said last year he was close to giving up his fruit plantations on the Costa Tropical. So to show you how bad those droughts were, see those plants here? Those are prickly pears, Opuntia ficus indica. And in the early 2000s, this plantation, the plants were still standing tall, 2 meters tall. They were full of juicy fruits, and the plantation was still active, so you could from time to time see cardboard boxes lying around from the last harvest where they had forgotten a couple cardboard boxes. So the cacti were lush and juicy and producing fruits. And while the agave are monocarp, so basically they die after they flower, the cactus, the prickly pear, is able to live for a very long time. But look at that, not a single one has survived. This was a lush plantation, well enough adapted to the desert climate, but apparently the big drought has done them in. Around here, even then, even in the early 2000s, before the big droughts, cacti and agave were mostly concentrated to the lower, more fertile and water-rich areas of the desert. You might think cacti and agave, they are typical desert plants, but yes-ish, but here they were always grown in the in the most wet and fertile parts, and even that didn't save them from completely dying off. You might see a prickly pear here and there, but this whole plantation, I don't think a single plant has survived, which is a pity because the fruits were pretty tasty. Near the beach, an old bunker, those are everywhere on the Spanish coast. Our dear friend, the fascist dictator Franco, was always afraid that the Allies might invade, so he built them everywhere, the old bastard. Another very conspicuous plant you will see throughout the area is the dwarf palm. Much better adapted to those dry conditions than the prickly pear. And it's native to the area. The dwarf palm, not a palm tree but a palm shrub, is the only palm native to the area and the only palm native to the European continent. And of all palms in the world, it's by far the one that grows furthest north. Also one of the most frost resistant palm species. Its northernmost populations in Italy are at the same geographical latitude as southern Canada. By the way, an interesting survival plant. Not only can you make a lot of things from the leaves to sell, you can also eat the fruits. Right now I don't see fruits, only old parched up inflorescences. You can eat the fruits and the hearts of this palm, but neither are really tasty, so it's considered more of a survival plant than of a tasty snack. Salsola Kali, the saltworth. When it's young, it's edible, like most Genoveses. This one is already bad. Definitely too old. Let's try a couple seedlings. No. I guess it's too dry. Yeah. But when they grow bigger, oh, this, by the way, yeah, leads us to another thing, but let's get to the usefulness of this plant first. When they grow older and die, you can basically collect them and burn them, and the ash from them is very rich in soda. Actually, I'm not sure if this is Salsola Kali or Salsola soda. Both were used to produce kali and soda, alkalic solutions which you can then use for the chemical industry, or for example for making soap. However, you might be more familiar with those plants from the Western movies. The funny thing is, they didn't exist in the old Wild West. They were introduced around the late 1800s and early 1900s from Eurasia to the US. And then when they started doing Western movies in the US, they started incorporating them, rolling through old ghost towns. Nowadays, those salsolas, they have evolved into some giant, sometimes truck, sometimes house-sized plants. They are very invasive in the US and causing big trouble. Also, I'm noticing that around here, I'm showing you again an area with trees. Very atypical for Cabo de Gata. But we will leave the trees behind very soon. I always forget the name of this one. Was it Lonea or what? Well, it's another one of those witches' brooms like Salsola that can roll through desert areas. And it's also edible while young, but let's not try it right now. In the shelter of a pine tree, a couple goji berries are growing. Not exactly sure about the species. Here is a little flower. Back in our time, they taught us those are wolfberries, those are poisonous plants, stay away from them. Now they say, those are goji berries, those are a superfood, eat them. However, there is not a single superfood on this superfruit. You must notice, or you might notice, or you might not notice, that the biggest part of this basin behind the Playa de los Genoveses is actually large-scale agriculture. Look at it, those are wheat fields. Well, not only wheat. This stuff here looks more like barley. There were a couple areas where stuff looked more like wheat. Here we have some oats. Basically, my suspicion is it doesn't really matter what grains they plant here, they sow here. And if you look at them, they don't really sow a lot of them. I've seen those fields since the early 2000s, and I've never seen anything worth harvesting, not even in the moistest years. And so I'm pretty sure that this is just one of those standard subsidy scams. In Europe you get subsidies per square meter, and I guess, and those make up more than half of the income of the farmers. And I guess the subsidies they get for cultivating almost a square kilometer of land here per year are quite big. Unfortunately, that also means that there is a square kilometer, well, plowed and sowed and driven on every year in this natural park, destroying the local vegetation, destroying the ecosystems. I don't even think they fertilize it or use any pesticides. However, there might be subsidies for fertilization and pesticides, and in this case they would do it. So yeah, very sad to see this. Like, for the next couple hundred meters we'll be walking mostly through those wheat fields. Here again, pretty much all the prickly pears in the area have died. I saw them in the early 2000s. They were already not looking very healthy, very dried up, but still alive. You could find the fruits here and there, but now they are gone. What you should definitely stay away from are those fruit-like things on the pine trees. Those are the processionarios, or processionari as they call them in Italy. Those are caterpillars that produce not only those cocoons but also millions of very dangerous little glochids or needles, much more dangerous than cactus needles. If they get into your respiratory tract, you can kick the bucket before you reach the next hospital. Here another complete row of cacti that didn't make it. 10 meters further another one. Couple meters further, agaves grown along a shallow gully. Again, not a single one of them did make it here. Yeah, it's crazy to see that the plants least adapted to this crazy climate are cacti and agave, the ones we associate most with desert conditions. What has survived, however, are those fruit trees here, the Carobs. They were introduced thousands of years ago from the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. Their fruits contain a lot of sugar and also protein and minerals. And when they are ripe, you can eat them out of hand. You can also make a tasty flour out of them, and from this you can make beverages and cakes and bread and mashes and porridges. You can also feed them to animals. They are very nutrient rich. Well, you can also, let me see if I find the ripe one, because those unripe ones are not edible. Quite a big harvest on this tree right now for such desert conditions. That's important. That means that the winter was not overly dry. But last year was very dry. That's why it's almost impossible to find remnants of old fruits here. Yeah, last year probably they didn't produce almost anything, but I need the old fruits, or at least an old seed. Oh, here it is, one single old carob seed. Oha! Those were used, it's a very small one. Those were used by the ancients to weigh gold and precious stones, because they all weighed exactly the same, 1 carat. However, now looking at the seed, I can tell you this is not 1 carat, this is much smaller. Yeah, carrot and carob is basically versions of the same name, because nowadays, of course, the carrot is standardized as 0.2 grams, but back then it was 1 carob seed. And I have the suspicion that every crafty merchant had two sets of seeds, one of particularly big ones for buying gold, and one of particularly small ones for selling gold. Funny thing is that nowadays those seeds are more valuable than ever before. Well, the fruit of the carob is not considered so valuable anymore, and a lot of ancient carob groves have been cut down. The seed is a congealing agent, basically a vegan version of gelatin. So nowadays sometimes the fruits are collected from the ground even after they are rotten, because it's not the fruit they want. They might feed it to animals or use it as fertilizer. It's the seed. One farmer told me the seed is 10% of the weight of the fruit, but 90% of the price. Good to see that this beautiful ancient tree is making a comeback. By the way, another name for carob is locust tree. And when you read the Bible and the prophets went to the desert to live off honey and locusts, there are not so many honeybees in the desert. There are locusts from time to time, but the honey tasting locusts are actually mostly the fruits of this thing. Also, you can see that there is still grazing going on here. See how all the leaves have been eaten until about 1.50 meters, grazing by goats. And actually 20 years ago you could still see, when the prickly pears were around and there was nothing else to eat in dry months, the goat herders would take out their knives, slice the young stems, which you might call leaves, but the pads are actually stems, slice the young stems into slices, and so that the goats could better eat them. Well, this famine or drought food for the goats is gone now. Look at this, farming for subsidies. I bet that throughout the whole century they haven't brought in a single harvest, and still they are destroying large parts of the desert with their greed. The wood sorrel, an invasive from South Africa, Oxalispes capre. The plant is quite tasty, tasting sour. However, well, you might chew on one leaf to kind of alleviate your thirst. This stuff will not give you water. On the contrary, this stuff is so full with oxalates it will give you kidney stones. And if you try to eat it in a situation where you don't have water, you're in trouble, because without water it will give you even more kidney stones. So you can eat a couple leaves of this if you have enough food and water around, but don't use it as a survival food. What you can, however, use as a survival food are the tubers of the wood sorrel. Oh, if they are too deep, I'm not digging them out. They are starchy and not sour, so I'm quite convinced that they don't, here is one, that they don't contain high oxalate. Usually they are much bigger, but I guess under desert conditions, that's what you get. No sourness, more of a starchiness. It's crazy to see this dry, parched landscape. Just yesterday I was on the Costa Tropical with fruitful tropical fruit plantations, lush meadows, plentiful flowers everywhere. And because the Costa Tropical was also quite parched, even in spring in previous years, I thought, oh, okay, if the Costa Tropical is so lush, the desert will also be lush, and I'll maybe catch a beautiful desert bloom. There was a minor desert bloom, but it's already over. Now what I catch are the more persistent grasses. Also here in the background along a gully, a row of fig trees. The figs, just like the carobs, also come from the Eastern Mediterranean and are also incredibly drought resistant, more than the prickly pear cacti, it seems. Another plant you can use for food are lamb's quarters. However, those are already too far gone. You must find a place with sufficient moisture to find some lamb's quarters which are still quite fresh. Let's walk into this gully, which is also being used as a trail. Maybe we'll find some fresher salads here. Also, the funny thing is, while I'm playing desert survival here, when I come back to civilization, I don't know what the situation there will be, because right now we are in a kind of a emergency situation here. It was crazy, like on the Costa Tropical, when I came back from the plantations to the little town of La Herradura, I was told, oh, no coffee and no warm food now. There is a power shortage. I said, oh, since when is the power off? Oh, 15 minutes. Okay, I had to wait for my bus, but while I waited, the power didn't come back on. Then I hopped into the bus on the lush Costa Tropical. 2.5 hours to Almeria, arriving in the desert. And at first I didn't notice anything. Almeria is the capital of this desert state of Almeria. Almeria is always a little bit gloomy. The houses mostly closed in, not as much greenery. But this time something seemed even more gloomy. People standing on the streets, people sitting in the bars and restaurants and drinking. And then when I went to a supermarket, it hit me. Well, firstly, most shops didn't even have lights. The big supermarket had lights inside. But there was basically panic buying. There was no bread left, which is normal because bread you need electricity to produce it constantly, but also the water was gone. Folks, if the people start panic buying water in the desert, you know that the crap hit the fan. Also, a lot of foods were gone because everybody, I guess, a lot of them they let them go home from their jobs and they thought, okay, let's go shopping. Oh, everybody else is shopping. Oh, there is no electricity and everybody else is shopping. How long is there not going to be an electricity? Okay, let's buy a little bit more than we need, especially important things like water and food. And yeah, it finally took me 3 little ethnic stores in the ethnic neighborhoods to find water. And while some of the life was going on like normal construction sites and buses were going and so, I really don't know what the situation will be when I come back into civilization. They were talking something about the bomb or stuff. I don't know, will the electricity be back? I mean, we are a modern European country here after all. Or will I come back into a complete chaos? Imagine I'm in a pretty bad area for survival. There is no water here, while in the Costa Tropical there were lush creeks everywhere in this year. Not in every year, but in this year lush, like clean water flowing everywhere. There is almost no food to be foraged here. While there you had the fruit plantations, abandoned fruit plantations, and those all the lush food, all the lush wild spring greens on the roadside. Also here, even if I found water, the area was a very important heavy metal mining area. Lead, silver, gold, copper. Heavy metals are not good for you. Even if I find the water source, it will most probably be contaminated. So yeah, I choose the worst day to leave the best survival landscape and come into one of the worst. See here, this part of the field, they didn't even sow any grains here. This is the lusher part in the lower areas. The soil is thick and lush, and they just plowed it. They didn't sow anything. It's all for subsidies, folks. Beautiful windmill in the distance. For some reason this thing turned off. So all my heavy duty work with this cactus fruit is not on camera. Removing all the areoles with the glow kits. This happened to me yesterday when I cut down a Washingtonia palm to eat it. Always when I'm doing the hardest work, my phone goes on strike. The taste is completely different from the more well-known prickly pear. Taste is more similar to pomegranates or even beets. To other brightly colored foods. By the way, I'm not aware of this cactus being used for dyeing. I mean, it is quite good at dyeing. But the prickly pear, which apparently now is quite good at other type of dyeing, was farmed here for a type of bug, the cochineal, that lives on the pads and can be harvested, and its blood is being used to color fruit gums and martini and Campari and such things. I could demonstrate you those bugs if the prickly pears hadn't all died. Let's check out this old abandoned farmhouse. I guess those were the stables. Also, you can see a couple modern bricks used here. Also, everything is suspiciously square, so some of those constructions might not be hundreds of years old, but being built in the early 20th century. Yeah, definitely stables. Yeah. Everything is surprisingly square and symmetrical. So not an ancient, well, maybe an ancient century old building, but definitely refurbished. Sometime in the 20th century. You can see the roof has fallen in. Here an old oven. Parking. Somebody has kicked in the door. Yeah, the pines. Are those pines? No, this looks like eucalyptus. Another sign that a lot of this stuff was built in the 20th century. Oh, also look at this. This is definitely 20th century. Here are the troughs for the animals. What are those? Cartridges? Birdshot cartridges? Yeah, so this is not a really ancient cortijo. But still, I mean, it must have been built in the early 20th century and then it collapsed somewhere in the late 20th century. Here is an older part. See how the roof is built on pine supports, then giant reed is being used above it, a layer of dirt, then a layer of cement, and then a layer of old roof tiles. Much unlike this part here. I wonder almost everything I can see up there is the old stuff, but at some time part of it was replaced. Those all seem to be stables. A lot of poo in here, and also this is not the pavement for humans. Wow, so many stables, but where did the people live? Another threshing floor here. This was some large-scale grain producing enterprise. I guess this was the water tank. Here a trough for the animals to use. Those water tanks can be quite interesting. A couple of decades ago I found one here in the area with a nice vaulted roof, and it was full of snakes. This one has a flat roof and the roof has caved in. Oh yeah, goes deep down there. And I thought there might be some underground water source, but no, it seems that this little gully here was used to bring water into the reservoir. Vitania, a Mediterranean relative of the Indian ashwagandha, called also the Indian ginseng, the most important herb in Ayurvedic medicine. Let's see, do I see any flowers or fruits? Here are the calyxes of the old fruits, but no, the little fruits have fallen out. I really would like to try them. Some ashwagandha species actually have quite palatable fruits, but seems I'm out of luck. All those calyxes are empty. I have to decide where to cross the desert hills to get to the silver mines. Problem is those silver mines are on no map, and also I couldn't find anything online on them. I know decades ago I saw a map where it said silver mines, and also I found a short mentioning in some tourist guide about the silver mines behind San Jose, but either most of those things haven't percolated into the modern internet, or I was just too stupid to find them. I think this low pass here between those two hills offers itself. Nothing really edible around here. the mustards, the lamb's quarters, all too old. What about the Asphodelus fistulosus? Never really foraged it, but it's supposed to be edible. Tough, not tasty, and burning my mouth with something that seems to be oxalate. What about the salt shrub here? A relative of lamb's quarters. Phew, nah. So, to say, all the spring greens are trash. Phew. The only fruits are prickly pears. Phew. No, not prickly pears, but, well, Delania prickly pears. The asparagus didn't send up any new shoots. No fruits on the goji berries. Yeah, the foraging situation is disastrous. Look at them. Away from the street and the beach, they are still plowing, but they haven't sown a single grain. Those basties. They've sown a couple grains down there near the road or near the beach where somebody might come and check on them. Here they are just plowing, just destroying the desert ecosystem and opening up the soil for erosion, wind and water erosion. They are not even sowing anything, and they are reaping all the subsidies. Yeah, I like the EU folks, but the EU subsidy politics are a mess. Oh, look at that. I found a wild watermelon plant. No, that's a find. It's only the second time I found one in this desert. The last time was over 20 years ago. Citrulus coloquintis. This watermelon species is not the direct ancestor of our edible watermelons. It's incredibly bitter, and it's being mostly used as a medicine. Like in Arabian shops, you can find the dried tennis ball sized watermelons. Look, typical watermelon leaves and flowers. Well, if I find one with old fruits, I might make a dedicated video. But yeah, you are traveling the desert and then suddenly out of nowhere, bam, a watermelon plant. It's not native to the area, but because the Arabs controlled this area for about 800 years, it's supposed that they brought it over as a medicine and it escaped from cultivation. I found a hideout for a hunter hunting quail or wild boars. They sometimes come over here. Yeah, see? No roof or anything, so definitely not a shelter for a goat herder. But hidden from every side, and a couple rocks with grass on top to sit on. Yeah, definitely a hunter's hideout. Finally reaching the typical desert vegetation. Yeah, this here is still a field that's being worked and subsidies are being received for it. But here, that's the local vegetation. Not the original vegetation. Originally those were dry forests. See this grass? This grass is incredibly important. You know, I once had a map of the important agricultural products of the world, and throughout southern Spain there was a big sign, Esparto grass. This grass here, this desert grass or steppe grass, I mean, yeah, it's covered with grass, so probably you rather call it a steppe than a desert. Was so important. This is the reason Spain was colonized. Yeah, before Spain was colonizing half the world, Spain has been colonized several times. And the first historic reports are about the colonization by Carthage. You know, this guy, Hannibal, who crossed the Alps on elephants, he came from Spain, but he was not Hispanic. He was of a Carthaginian colonizer family. And why did they colonize Spain? Because of those grasses. I found a reference, was it Strabo or Pliny? Some of the important historians of the antique Roman world who said that the Carthaginians, well, they came from Lebanon and Syria, from the Levant. Then they colonized northern Africa, where they felt pretty well, except that the grasses there were not of good quality. And on the other side of the ocean, in Spain, in Europe, the grasses were of excellent quality. Quality for what? You cannot eat this. This is hard as wire. Excellent quality, not for eating, but for crafting. This grass is so tough, you can make everything from it. Baskets, shoes, furniture, bags, you name it. It's almost like wire.